Donald Trump pulls a 180 on the Epstein files. What is actually going on here? What is the White House's play? What is the Democratic play? Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene, their feud is only escalating. Meanwhile, what is going on with tariffs? Is this rebate going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And all in the background, the continuing fallout from the Tucker Carlson Nick Fuentes interview. Donald Trump himself finally weighing in. What did he say? It might not be what you expect. All that and more in today's episode of The Josh Hammer Show. Well, after days and days of shoo-shooing away the Epstein files story, this story that we deliberately have not paid a ton of attention to here on the show for the very simple reason that I personally view it as something of a distraction. I think that's basically the president's view of this as well. But after trying to shoo it for days, Trump has pulled something of a 180. So this is actually coming in late Sunday evening. Just last night, essentially around the time that many of us were ready to go to sleep on the East Coast, the newswire came in. Donald Trump has now called for House Republicans to release as many of the so-called Epstein files as possible. Donald Trump writing on Truth Social late on Sunday, just after landing at Joint Base Andrews, following a weekend at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida. He wrote on Truth Social, quote, "We have nothing to hide, and it's time to move on from this Democrat hoax perpetrated by radical left lunatics in order to deflect from the great success of the Republican Party." So he's now saying that this next impending vote, the discharge petition, should now get a full release. And it looks like the Republicans have the vote. So you've had some Republicans, namely Thomas Massie of Kentucky and Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, who have said that it's not just them, but this next discharge petition, teaming up with Democrats. Some of them say it could potentially get as many as 100 Republican votes to release the next tranche of Epstein documents. This coming on the heels, if you're not following this super closely, and I don't blame you, frankly, if you're not, this coming on the heels of the 23,000, give or take, emails and various other documents that were just released via the House Oversight Committee via a similar bipartisan vote this past Wednesday. Donald Trump on Sunday talking about the Epstein files, talking about how this is just a bunch of fake news. This is basically his take on this whole saga, which he really, really just wants to end. Here is the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
Fake news like you're a terrible reporter, and fake news like you, they just keep bringing that up to deflect from the tremendous success of the Trump administration. So a guy like Massie, his poll numbers are showing he's at 6% approval rating right now. And we call him Rand Paul Jr. because he never votes for the Republican Party. So they're using Jeffrey Epstein as a deflection from the tremendous success that we're having as a party.
So first of all, Thomas Massie can go screw himself. Thomas Massie is terrible. He has become a massive hindrance, a thorn in the side of MAGA, a thorn in the side of the president's agenda. He is also part of the crazy caucus. Marjorie Taylor Greene, so Donald Trump unendorsing both of them. Marjorie Taylor Greene just over the weekend. More on that later in the show, by the way, when it comes to Marjorie Taylor Greene. But Donald Trump, as you hear there in that clip just after he lands at Joint Base Andrews, he's frustrated. He views this as a distraction. That's around the time that he posts on Truth Social. Just release it already. Just release it. Just show what we got. This is the correct move. Okay, this is the correct thing to do. Just nip it in the bud. Just nip this story in the bud. And if you can't see the frustration in my face, yeah, it's because I'm pretty frustrated about this story. Look, we're about policy. We're about law. We're about substance here. We're about fighting for the heart and soul of conservatism. More on that later in the show as well. We're about fighting for the heart and soul of the only viable political movement in America that is capable of saving this great country, this great experiment in order to liberty from one generation to the next. And that one movement is the American right. It is the conservative movement. Jeffrey Epstein, who was a decades-long Democrat mega donor who was palling around with all these Democrats, I'm sorry, but it is just not one of the most important issues. I'm not making light of the horrific things that happened in this terrible, terrible, terrible story, namely involving Jeffrey Epstein and who knows who else was potentially involved there. By the way, Ro Khanna, the ambitious congressman from California on the Democrat side, and Thomas Massie, the aforementioned Massie of Kentucky, those two and Marjorie Taylor Greene are teaming up for apparently some sort of major press conference that they have teased coming up tomorrow morning on Tuesday, November 18th at 9 a.m. Eastern time. They say at this press conference they'll be joined by survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse. So that should be interesting. It would be very interesting, I think, for the American people to see more survivors actually speak out. There's been a general dearth or paucity of that. Maybe it has to do with non-disclosures or hush money schemes. Who knows? There's a lot of secrecy pertaining to all of this, which frankly I think is why a lot of American people have called for transparency. Now, I have always been a skeptic of the entire notion of the so-called Epstein files for the very simple reason that, well, I mean, not to just say it so explicitly, but I'm a lawyer, so I know how these things actually work. So when we talk about the Epstein files, what are we actually talking about there? Well, first, there was the infamous handoff from Alex Acosta, the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida back in the George W. Bush administration, back around 2007, give or take, who handed it off to the local Palm Beach County, Florida state prosecutor's office there. So that was actually a state investigation at that time when Epstein was first found for legal trouble for running this horrific pedophilia and child sex trafficking scheme. It wasn't until many years later, many years later, that the DOJ started to get involved. And the notion that there is just one single compendium of Epstein files here, I mean, from soup to nuts, I mean, let's release all 5, 20,000, 100,000 pages, whatever the heck it is there. That's not how it works. It's just not how it works. Grand jury testimony in particular, it is very, very difficult to release these things there. So when this came up on the campaign trail, I always kind of rolled my eyes a little bit. I understand that this is something that some people feel really, really, really strong about. And again, we all want justice there, but the notion that this is ever going to be a clean revelation just defies basic rules of criminal procedure. Who knows about possible statute of limitations issues as well, even if you get past the disclosure threshold when it comes to actually prosecuting some of the stuff there. There's just a lot of questions there. As for the Democrats, because again, the White House perspective here is to just nip this thing in the bud. And let's get back to the actual business of the American people. From the Democrat perspective, well, they claim to be these righteous crusaders against Donald Trump, whose name came up in over 1,000 of the emails that were released last Wednesday. They're not really giving you the full context necessarily as to how that came up. It is well known that Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump knew each other. It is equally well known, as Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, went out of her way to show and to tell the American people last week. It's also true that Donald Trump literally kicked Jeffrey Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago after his horrific deeds when it comes to underage girls started to come to light. So yeah, they knew each other. Guess what? Jeffrey Epstein knew a lot of powerful people. And Democrats, I think, would go a lot further when it comes to the obvious hypocrisy here if they were interested in going after their own people as well. Bill Clinton was allegedly on the so-called Lolita Express, the Jeffrey Epstein plane, over 30 times. I mean, Epstein was a Democrat. He was literally a mega donor, mega connected Democrat. There was a stunning revelation as well in this email batch from this past week. The New York Post was reporting it and wrote an article about it over the weekend. Representative Stacey Plaskett, who is a non-voting congresswoman in the U.S. House representing the U.S. Virgin Islands, somehow Jeffrey Epstein knew her. I mean, I guess it makes sense. Epstein Island, the Virgin Islands. Okay, it's kind of not hard to put two and two together here. And there was a 2019 congressional hearing, a House Oversight Committee back in February 2019, in which the infamous Michael Cohen was testifying there. This is kind of the predicate to what became the Alvin Bragg witch hunt, the Stalinist prosecution of Donald Trump on the stupid corporate fraudulent bookkeeping, the hush money stuff with Stormy Daniels there. So Michael Cohen is testifying before Congress back in 2019, and Epstein is literally texting this non-voting Virgin Islands Congresswoman, Stacey Plaskett, in real time. Like, she's like, I'm up next. What should I say? I mean, Not sketchy at all, right? So there's that. There's Bill Clinton. Also, there's a fascinating thing that I saw Tom Elliott post on X. Tom Elliott is the founder of Gradian, which is well known for sourcing clips when it comes to the media. So Tom Elliott found a fascinating email exchange. Jeffrey Epstein wrote an email to Tom Pritzker on November 28th, 2016, quote, Barack and the boys in PB, wild, wild. So PB is Palm Beach. That's where Epstein had an estate. Barack, who could that possibly refer to? I only know one Barack, don't you? Well, as the case may be, Barack Obama actually was in South Florida, right around that time, November 2016, right around that exact same time, campaigning for then Democrat candidate Hillary Clinton. So if the Democrats were actually intellectually honest here, if they were not just trying to get Trump by any means possible, whatever that even means in this context there, then they would be asking not just what did Bill Clinton know and when did he know it, they would also be asking what did Barack Obama know and when did he know it. In any event, as I said, this is a righteous attempt to call for transparency when it comes to Donald Trump. This is a righteous and sound attempt to just nip this thing in the bud, and frankly, in many ways, just to kind of get it over with. Because if there was one lesson that is fairly unmistakable from the off-year elections in New York City, New Jersey, and Virginia now 2 weeks ago, it is this. It is that the American people, yes, they are interested in the soap opera and the drama. And yes, of course, I've said this a million times. Yes, of course, we all want justice for these girls. And let's see what this press conference looks like tomorrow with Roka Hanna, Thomas Massey, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, although the inclusion of the latter two, especially MTG, leads me to believe that this might be more of a circus than a press conference, but we shall see. Everyone wants that. But the American people, really, first and foremost, what do they want? They want relief. They want the economy to get up there and working again. The exit polls from the off-year elections were very clear on this. Affordability, inflation, cost of living. These are the things that the American people really are concerned about at this time. Now, they're also concerned about other basic quality of life issues. When it comes to criminal aliens, there's been some massive operations in Charlotte, North Carolina, among other metropolises over the past week or so. And they care about crime more generally speaking, but it is these economic issues, folks. It is these economic issues, I think, that the American people are basically screaming to our elites, to our ruling class, to our elected class, to our leaders in Washington, D.C., do something. Like, literally do something. Help us. So to that extent, there was actually an interesting executive order that the White House put out just this past Friday. This executive order is titled Strengthening the Economy and National Security Through Tariffs and Trade Deals. And effectively, what this executive order does is it calls off the reciprocal tariffs on a number of specific goods when it comes to coffee and tea, tropical fruits and fruit juices, cocoa and spices, banana, oranges, tomatoes, beef is a big one, and some sorts of additional fertilizers. Now, recall, we talked about this on the show already, recall that there is a lot of legal uncertainty lurking in the background about all of this president's reciprocal tariffs schemes. I've explained why, if I were a member of the U.S. Supreme Court, and I don't particularly want to be, and but if I were, I would probably vote to uphold these tariffs because I think this president takes a very unique view of tariff policy as not merely a means of raising revenue or as reshoring supply chains, but also as an instrument of foreign policy. Therefore, I think that he is perhaps uniquely, idiosyncratically better suited than other presidents to credibly assert that trade deficits are a national security issue necessitating emergency powers. Now, it's admittedly a very, very debatable issue there. There's, of course, also the very basic Article 1, Section 8 constitutional argument that tariffs, levies, all this has to originate in the House, or initially really in the House, even more so than the Senate. That's how our constitutional structure works. So I predict that all this, if I'm being very candid here, I don't think that there actually are 5 votes to uphold the president's tariff policy, certainly based on what I heard at oral argument. But I personally probably would vote to uphold it. But holding the pending Supreme Court aside, this executive order on Friday is trying to give real relief to the American people on a bunch of these different goods: bananas, oranges, tomatoes, beef, fruits, coffee, tea, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a few things going on here. On the one hand, I'm not entirely sure how to square the circle where, on the one hand, you've had a lot of folks say that tariffs are not contributing to inflation, and then on the other hand, you're responding to these off-year elections where the people say that they're hurting for inflation by trying to cut the tariffs. So that doesn't quite add up to me. Surely it seems to me that if you're cutting the tariffs as trying to give relief to the American people for a price increase that they've seen on some of these commodities and goods that I've just listed, that seems to me perhaps like then there is at least some inflationary aspect to all of this. Maybe not a ton, but some inflationary aspect. Look, my basic take on tariffs is the following. They are a historical tool of raising revenue prior to the ratification of the 16th Amendment to the Constitution. It actually was the number one revenue-raising tool for the United States government, going back since time immemorial, literally since Alexander Hamilton first developed what we now refer to as the American system for industrial policy and manufacturing and so forth there. So that's one reason. The other reason is that you have a security interest in trying to reshore or at least ally shore, to bring to allies, national security critical infrastructure and supply chains, especially those at which no country has a unique comparative advantage, to borrow from Ricardo, the neoclassical economist, or has no unique ability to produce or manufacture a certain good. So on the one hand, that would, in my opinion, would more than justify some sort of industrial policy measure, some sort of tariff scheme in order to try to incentivize Intel, NVIDIA, and various other tech companies here in the U.S. to better compete with Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company when it comes to the semiconductors and various other computer chips. That, to me, is a more than justified use of tariff policy, and I would wholeheartedly support that. In fact, I think it was lunacy that neoliberal laissez-faire fundamentalism ever led to the fact that a shockingly high percentage of the world's most advanced chips are now produced in Taipei, in Taiwan, which sits like 50 miles off the coast of America's number one geopolitical rival. I mean, who in the world thought that would be a good idea? It obviously is a terrible idea. So that is on the one hand. On the other hand, the notion that it is a good idea to slap tariffs on, like, bananas or other tropical fruits. I mean, like, what are we trying to do here? Hawaii produces a bunch of bananas. My state of Florida produces some. The vast majority of bananas are imported for the very simple reason that most of America is not hospitable to growing bananas. Coffee, I mean, there is plenty of coffee made in Hawaii and other, made to a lesser extent here in Florida as well, but we get most of our coffee imported too, places like Colombia, Costa Rica, places like that. So it's just not obvious to me what exactly you're doing here. Like what was the point? So there needs to be a little more clear rhyme and reason to setting tariffs in general. Again, to an extent, they're useful for raising revenue, but if you're worried about inflation, then you're going to cut them on the back ends. It just doesn't really quite add up there. The number one purpose of tariffs in a 21st century political economy is indeed for the reason that I said, when it comes to trying to secure national security, critical supply chains, things like that, when it comes to semiconductors, chips, and all of the above. On that note, there's also floating in the background, in addition to this legal uncertainty of the tariff case, which I anticipate will probably get expedited on the Supreme Court schedule. Normally, an opinion of this magnitude, they would hold off to decide until the end of the term. That's what the justices like to do. They normally hold off on the big, sexy topics for May, June, the very end, maybe even the first week of July, based on recent years. Given just how important this tariff case is to Wall Street and investors and, I mean, anyone really. I mean, anyone who has any skin in the game when it comes to these various products there. Given the economic stakes and given the uncertainty of what the remedy would be if they were held unconstitutional, I predict that a ruling will probably come even quicker. If I had to give a very crude, rough guess, I would guess sometime between January and March, but ultimately it's just a guessing game. What do I know? But amidst that timeline, there's also now a lot of chatter of Donald Trump possibly giving out a $2,000 a person tariff rebate, essentially a dividend. And there's a lot of uncertainty about this as well, but for what it's worth, here is Donald Trump talking to Air Force One about this exact plan.
Hundreds of billions of dollars on a fake deal called the Inflation Reduction Act. That was made up money. When I pay people $2,000 each for low and moderate income and middle income people, everybody but the rich get this. That's not made up. That's real money. That comes from other countries.
Okay, so look, Donald Trump is at his core a populist. He's at his core a populist. That's just who he is. That's what he's been for a very long time. That's a large part of his political appeal. On the one hand, who in the world does not want a $2,000 check? I want it. You want it. We all want it. Who doesn't want free money? On the other hand, if we're trying to be sober here and just think about the economic fallout of this, it seems to me like it is not difficult to draw somewhat of a straight line from the gargantuan spending during COVID-19, the very final year of the Trump presidency, the first time, into the first year of the Biden presidency, the gargantuan spending, including doing exactly this, including mailing out checks to the American people there. It's pretty easy to draw a straight line from that to the record-shattering 4-decade high inflation during the Biden presidency that reached an apex of 9.1% during the summer of 2022. So, again, selfishly, would love it. Who doesn't want that? Amazing. Take my wife on a nice little vacation or whatever. I mean, we all want that. It sounds fantastic. On the other hand, if the American people are actually saying that inflation is a massive problem and cost of living and affordability, and if we're already now starting to trim certain tariffs because of the perception that the price of some of those goods, coffee, tea, beef, really beef is what I'm hearing a lot, beef is getting too high, then it objectively probably does not make sense to start to mail out some of these checks there. Again, I would love it. You would love it. Who doesn't want it? Who doesn't love it? But is it the right thing? I don't know. Frankly, even if it is the right thing, I'm kind of skeptical that it will happen. This would require an affirmative act of Congress. It's not the kind of thing that you could actually do willy-nilly. We'll see. We will see if they have the votes there. Again, Republicans have a very narrow majority in the U.S. House. You lose a Thomas Massie, you lose another fiscal conservative like a Chip Roy there. You're already playing with fire when it comes to the margin that Mike Johnson can assemble. So the actual law and the separation of powers might not permit this to happen either. On the politics of it, sure, I get it. Trump's a populist there, but thinking about inflation, I'm just not entirely sure, frankly, that this is ultimately going to be the best idea, as much as I genuinely, trust me, I really understand the appeal. Meanwhile, there's so much more going on in the background. So much more. We tease this numerous times when it comes to Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie and all that stuff. There is a lot happening in the background more when it comes to just this continued battle, and it really is something of a battle for the heart and soul of the American right, and by extension, the heart and soul of the United States of America, for which the American right is the only viable political vehicle that can actually save that. Now, there was something of a hit piece published over the weekend that I do have to briefly address, and then we will go on to Marjorie Taylor Greene and Trump and Fuentes and all of that. So the publication that hilariously and deeply ironically calls itself The American Conservative, this is run by the execrable Kurt Mills, who was something of a laughingstock. It was founded by the paleoconservative icon, Pat Buchanan. It has very low traffic. It's not really worth getting into the details of who or what the American Conservative represents. My friend Johnny Burka actually was the executive director of the American Conservative for a good amount of time, did fantastic work really trying to rebuild the image and credibility of this publication that had for a long time trafficked in the fever swamps of the anti-Semitic, quote-unquote, far right. Unfortunately, under its current failed leadership, they are kind of going back to where they started. They published numerous hit pieces about me in recent years, or in recent months, really, frankly. So this piece drops over the weekend at the American Conservative, talking mainly about Salem Media Group. So this show, Josh Hammer Show, is a product of Newsweek, but starting just a little over a month ago, we began our formal partnership with Salem Media Group, for which we could not possibly be prouder. I am an extraordinarily proud member now of the Salem Podcast Network family, and this show you can, of course, access via Salem News Channel, salemnewschannel.com as well. So this piece at the American Conservative goes directly after Brad Parscale, who is a good man, is a very good man, former Trump campaign manager, by the way, among other roles that Brad currently has. He's also the chief strategy officer at Salem. Now, Brad signed a FARA filing, a Foreign Agent Registration Act filing, on behalf of the Israeli government. This is not a secret. Brad's been very public about that. In fact, he wrote an entire op-ed explaining his decision over at Town Hall, a Salem property. I encourage you to check it out. It was a very good op-ed, frankly. Now, the issue with this article at the American Conservative is that my name is actually in the subhead there. It says, "Oh, Salem is home to Dinesh D'Souza and Josh Hammer." Now, the implication is clear that because Brad Parscale has, in his independent capacity, has registered under FARA for Israel to try to do what he can to advance Israel's interests, which he views as America's interests, because, yeah, our interests really often overlap. That's a key part of my book, Israel and Civilization. The implication in this article is that Dinesh D'Souza, Aaron Molan, our Australian colleague on the Salem Podcast Network, myself, maybe others, are somehow, we have our editorial influence affected by this. And I'm just here to say directly and unequivocally that implication is utter garbage. It is complete and utter BS. None of us, not Dinesh, not Aaron, not myself, no one else at the Salem Podcast Network, one, gets a penny when it comes to Brad Parscale, our colleague Brad's independent FARA filing with the Israeli government. That's one. Two, most important for present purposes, none of us take any editorial direction about anything that we say other than what is coming from our own heart. Dinesh D'Souza stands against the anti-Semitic, Jew-hating, Indian-hating, racist, misogynist, anti-Semitic parts of the quote-unquote right for the very simple reason that he is a good and principled man. Aaron Molan, our Australian colleague, does so for the exact same reason. I've been saying all this for years and years and years. The notion that these are in any way connected whatsoever is total nonsense. And the implication as well, lurking in the background, this is something that these folks love to say over and over again. Tucker Carlson loves to say this as well. More on him in just a second. They love to say that how could you ever support what the government of Israel is doing? How could you ever support U.S.-Israel relations unless you're on the dole? You know, this stupid meme about $7,000 a tweet, I literally don't know where that came from. I actually have no idea what the source is. I don't know a single person who's gotten anything like that, gotten a penny, frankly, for that matter. But the notion is that you can't possibly support this regime and this connection unless you're directly, personally, financially benefiting. That is garbage. For decades and decades and decades, there have been citizens of goodwill who support the U.S.-Israel relationship because they think it's important. They think it's important from a security perspective when it comes to the Middle East, when it comes to a foothold against radical Islamism, when it comes to a strategic perspective, when it comes to having a military ally there who can do things like patrol the Red Sea, the Suez Canal, all these various crucial waterways for international trade and shipping and commerce. Perhaps they care about it for religious or theological reasons, Jews and Christians alike. You know, a much bigger group, frankly, than AIPAC is CUFI, Christians United for Israel, Pastor John Hagee's group. As J.D. Vance himself said in a fantastic speech at the Quincy Institute in May 2024, there are tens and tens of millions, perhaps even hundreds of millions of Americans of good faith who care about this relationship, yes, for America First, national interest, security reasons, but also for genuine, sincerely held religious beliefs. Something that the Founding Fathers would have been really, really, really familiar with, by the way. So I just detest this implication that you can't possibly care about it unless you're on the dole. It's disgusting. It's designed to slur and slander many of us who care about this relationship, who care about the Jewish-Christian alliance, who care about the ecumenical, biblical, Western civilization inheritance more generally, who care about this for reasons that have nothing to do with getting a penny, let alone $7,000 a tweet, as Matt Gaetz and all these various other provocateurs just keep on saying and saying and saying. It's just total nonsense. Now, speaking of the crazy caucus, we've previously explained on our show how I'm not a big fan these days of Marjorie Taylor Greene. Marjorie Taylor Greene was the single leading provocateur who a few weeks ago ludicrously and insanely accused me of calling for Tucker Carlson's assassination because of a willfully dishonest and disingenuous interpretation of the word neutralized in an op-ed for the Daily Mail. Neither here nor there for present purposes. So there is no love loss between me and Marjorie Taylor Greene, but amazingly, there is actually now no love loss between Donald Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Marjorie Taylor Greene getting the full Trump treatment, and boy, is it glorious. He called her a raging lunatic, a traitor to our country, and he has unendorsed Marjorie Taylor Greene in saying that he is now very, very interested and a potential primary challenger to Marjorie Taylor Greene there in her Northwest Georgia district, much as Donald Trump is looking forward to trying to hopefully unseat Thomas Massie there in Kentucky. Here is Donald Trump speaking about Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Greene said her life could be in danger because of the rhetoric.
Her life is in danger? Who's that?
Marjorie Taylor Greene, she says.
Marjorie Taylor Greene. I don't think her life is in danger. Frankly, I don't think anybody cares about her. Okay.
So Marjorie Taylor Greene looked at Trump's Truth Social post and said that her life was in danger because Trump came after her. Maybe you should have thought of that before you arguably put my life in danger by saying that I called for Tucker Carlson's assassination, which I obviously did not. I condemn political violence with every fiber of my being. Disgusting. It's a disgusting accusation. They literally arrested someone about a month ago outside Houston, Texas, for making online death threats against me, Carol Markowitz, Seth Dillon, and Laura Loomer. The notion that I would call for political violence is disgusting. It's abhorrent. It is beneath contempt. So maybe, Marjorie Taylor Greene, you should have thought of the possible repercussions of putting someone in danger before you came after me, which has the effect, arguably, of putting myself in danger on such ludicrous grounds. This is good Trump. This is very good Trump. It's distancing himself from the cancerous elements of the so-called right, from the Thomas Masseys, from the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world, these charlatans, these hucksters who get in front of the cameras. And by the way, speaking of huckster, I mean, someone might want to check up on Marjorie Taylor Greene's bank account these days. I mean, she's either the next Warren Buffett when it comes to some of her trade deals, making, she's profited tens of millions of dollars over her time in Congress from trading. So she's either the next Warren Buffett or there's something a little more shady and sinister going on there. Speaking of ethics and trying to take the moral high ground. Anyway, this is Trump at his best when it comes to distancing himself from Marjorie Taylor Greene, calling her a lunatic and things like that. Unfortunately, in that same interview, after Donald Trump had just landed at Joint Base Andrews from his weekend at Mar-a-Lago, they also asked him about the interviews seen all around the world, the Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes interview. This is Trump not at his best. Let's watch that.
Mr. President, Tucker Carlson recently had a friendly interview with anti-Semite Nick Fuentes. Tucker Carlson. What role do you think Tucker Carlson should play in the Republican Party and the conservative movement going forward?
Well, I found him to be good. I mean, he said good things about me over the years. I think he's good. We've had some good interviews. I did an interview with him where we had 300 million hits. You know that. Look, I can't tell him. Will you let me finish my statement? You are the worst. You're with Bloomberg, right? You are the worst. I don't know why they even have you. We've had some great interviews with Tucker Carlson, but you can't tell him who to interview. I mean, if he wants to interview Nick Fuentes, I don't know much about him, but if he wants to do it, get the word out. Let him, people have to decide. Ultimately, people have to decide.
All right, so before I criticize what Trump said, there's actually some truth to what he said there. Let me unpack that. You obviously cannot tell Tucker Carlson who to interview. He can interview whoever the heck he wants to interview. So can I. So can anyone who has a show. No one is telling anyone who he can or cannot talk to in conversation. What we also then can do, you have the same free speech right to engage whatever colloquy or conversation you want to engage in, and then I have the same free speech right to either applaud that or to criticize that. It is not cancel culture to criticize someone's editorial judgment when it comes to anything. Think about it this way. If some left-wing columnist at the New York Times wrote a ridiculous op-ed and I criticized it, am I engaging in cancel culture? No. The columnist is engaging in freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and so forth. So am I. That's how it works in the town square, in the public arena more generally. So too here, no one is saying that Tucker Carlson does not have the right to interview whoever he wants to. We are saying that when he interviews a loathsome, detestable little neo-Nazi punk like Nick Fuentes, someone who literally self-identifies, who calls himself Team Hitler, who says that Hitler was really effing cool, who says that interracial marriage was a mistake, he's a dripping racist, who says the most abhorrent things imaginable about women. He's a horrific misogynist, probably because he's a little incel, who has called J.D. Vance a race traitor for being married to his beautiful wife, Usha, who I've had the pleasure of meeting. When Tucker gives a fluff interview to him, and by the way, some reporting that broke over the weekend, apparently before the interview just came out over the weekend, Fuentes apparently the night before at dinner with Tucker was a little nervous, and apparently Tucker went out of his way to placate him and say this will actually be a very friendly interview. Tucker Carlson's brother, Buckley Carlson, not his son, same name is very confusing, not son, but his brother, Buckley Carlson, now has some tweets that have come up that seem very pro-Fuentes. So, you know, you would be forgiven for asking some questions as to what exactly was Tucker's agenda here. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Seemed to me like he had a pretty sinister agenda, and we are well within our rights to criticize that. So Trump is doing very well when it comes to trying to toss out Marjorie Taylor Greene. He is doing less well when he is here just excusing the Tucker Fuentes interview on the grounds that his own conversation with Tucker got a lot of hits. No, Mr. President, you are the leader of the Republican Party, and you are the leader of the United States. At a time, as now, we are at another moment for choosing in many ways. There is a sinister element of your own purported coalition, Mr. President, that seeks not merely to bolster your coalition, but frankly to tear it asunder at the seams and to destroy it. These folks want to destroy MAGA, your movement, and to build something quite different in its place come 2028, maybe 2032, at some point thereafter. It is really ultimately on you and the Vice President, J.D. Vance, who, as I mentioned, actually has some self-interest here as the husband of a wonderful Indian woman. It is on them, ultimately, to really, really nip this growing, vile wing of the so-called right in the bud. The politics are suicidal, even holding aside the basic human decency and morality of it all. For every little 19-year-old, 20-year-old, socially awkward, vocationally inept Nick Fuentes Rumble streamer that you think you're picking up as part of the coalition, you're going to lose at least 3 to 5 more people. Why? Because most people don't want anything to do with this. They want nothing to do with the sanitization of Nick Fuentes, who, per his Tucker interview, literally celebrates Joseph Stalin's birthday. I mean, the dude's like the first Hitler-Stalin joint fan ever. I mean, it's not like they went to war or anything. Regardless, the politics are insane. At the exact moment that the MAGA coalition, especially in 2024, was really solidifying and reifying this years-long ascendance as a multi-ethnic working-class coalition, at the same time that they were making historic inroads, Republicans and MAGA, historic inroads into young people, the under 29 demographic, essentially a coin flip between Kamala and Trump. When it comes to black men, a historic percentage of black men coming to vote for Trump, Hispanic men outright winning them. Really? This is what you want to do? Is go down this path of trying to sanitize and welcome in either literal Nazis or at least the Nazi curious, shall we say, into the party? This is your formula for success? This is what you think is going to win elections right now? At a time when the American people want to focus on the economy? Really? It doesn't make sense. Even holding aside all of the moral concerns, even holding aside all of this, the disgusting nature. I mean, could you imagine? I think about this a lot. Could you imagine what Dwight D. Eisenhower, who led the Allied forces to the beach of Normandy on D-Day in June 1944, ultimately a president during the 1950s, could you imagine what Dwight D. Eisenhower, who literally defeated the Nazis, he was a Republican. I mean, what would he have said at this moment? He would have been horrified. Absolutely horrified. This is not politics by addition. This is politics by ignorance or subtraction. No one is saying that Tucker Carlson or anyone else does not deserve a platform or a microphone or this. We are saying that some of these editorial decisions are really, really, really bad. And in the case of Mr. Carlson, it is more than fair to start asking questions, as we've done on this show repeatedly, as to which side you are on. as Charlie Kirk would have put it, are you on Team Civilization or are you on Team Barbarism? It's not at all obvious to me that Carlson is on Team Civilization. And to an extent, you can say that about many of these other hangers-on as well. Marjorie Taylor Greene perhaps comes to mind to no small extent. That is for sure. So this stuff's going to continue. And the Trump interview there, talking about the Fuentes Tucker stuff, that brings us now back to the forefront of the national conversation. This issue is not going away. Ultimately, the way that this thing stops and it is nipped in the bud is for President Trump and Vice President Vance to realize that the politics here, hold aside the morality, the politics are insane. This is a recipe for a fast track to political irrelevance, Republican Party suicide, and ultimately from there, God forbid, the slow spiraling descent into the self-inflicted wound and possible suicide of the United States of America. I'm Josh Hamlin. This is the Josh Hamlin.